Jung's Analytical Psychology, Part 10, Personality Types. For Personality Psychology, Dr. Michael Botwin, Department of Psychology, California State University, Fresno. Jung has 16 different personality types in his model. And this is one of the most widely disseminated pieces of information about Jungian theory out there, as there are free online tests that measure these. You'll be taking one of them for your personality assessment paper. It's a part of the project students generally find extremely enjoyable, and many students have already taken these tests, even though they're personality things, in other classes. So, what I want to talk to you today is about these 16 types. Now, there are 2 attitudes and 4 functions. When you look at the interplay, the intermix of all of these, you end up getting 16 types. Now, the first score on a Jungian type is attitude. So first you got to cop an attitude. The 2 Jungian attitudes are extraversion and introversion. Let's talk about extraversion first. And from a Jungian perspective, extroverts orientate themselves to the external objective world. They seek information, they seek feedback and other things from external sources. They look outward to understand the world. This is in opposition to introversion. And Jungian introverts orientate themselves towards the inner subjective world. It's almost a Platonic forms kind of thing if you know your classical philosophy. The notion is you have all knowledge inside of yourself and you just have to be able to pull it out of yourself to make it useful. Full disclosure here, I've taken the test associated with this several times. I always come up with the same Jungian type. And I, as I'll say many places in this class, am an introvert. Now, Jungian introversion, extraversion is different than our modern scientific conception of introversion, extraversion, which is something we'll get to down the line when we get to our trait unit. But for the sake of our discussion, extroverts are externalizers, introverts internalizers from a Jungian point of view. It's not so much wrapped up in the gregariousness, the sociability, and those other common components we typically discuss when we talk about introversion, extroversion. So your first letter of your 4-letter Jungian type is always going to be either an I for introversion or an E for extroversion. So there are 8 introverted types and 8 extroverted types. So now that we've got our attitude straightened out, let's look at the functions. Now there are 2 sets of functions. There are rational functions and irrational functions. Now, irrational doesn't mean lack of logic and things like that. We'll talk about the irrational functions shortly. Individuals high on rational functions use reason, judgment, abstract, generalization. They tend to make decisions based on judgments, looking at connections, and on the other end, how something feels. So let's look at the two rational functions. First of which is thinking. Individuals scoring high on this function attempt to intellectually understand the world. And they do it by looking at connections between ideas, understanding the nature of the world, or problem solving. So they're processing information, trying to understand the world. That's my third score. Highest score is thinking on the Jungian scales, if you care. The opposite of thinking is feeling. Individuals that score high on the feeling function are good at evaluating emotions, or they use their emotions to interpret information. And they may do this by using positive or negative emotions. They accept or reject ideas based on the emotions that they arouse. Does something feel good? Does something feel bad? They also place high value on their subjective experiences of things like pleasure, pain, anger, fear, sorrow, joy, and love. So you're either a thinker or a feeler. And this is going to become important as you go down in terms of things. One of the examples I typically use to talk about the functions is where are these functions aroused in any given situation. And I think about making a major purchase as something that's going to differentiate thinkers and feelers. So let's say that you're going to go out and buy a new car. One way of doing it is to go get consumer reports, study Kelley Blue Book on the web, search for car reviews, look at the mechanical history, repair records of the vehicle. All of that stuff's readily now available on the internet. But what do the car dealers want you to do? They want you to go and sit in that new car. It's got the new car smell, it's got the new car feel. It hasn't been driven a lot, everything's working perfectly fine, hopefully. And you just sink into those new seats that haven't been sat on for a long time, and you look and you say, this feels good. Or you might say, I would look really, really cool sitting in this car. Of course, I've gotten into cars that I was looking at buying. Recently bought a car a year and a half ago after having my old beater for 16 years. And I got into what was a very expensive car. It was a Beamer. And I got in there and I just didn't like it. It was like, no, this isn't my car. I don't like how it feels. I don't like this. I don't like that. Now maybe I'm too fussy, but I got a car with a much simpler set of controls. The controls were kind of spaceship-like. And even though I'm a gadget junkie, it was a little too gadgety for me. So I just had the negative feeling about that. Although there were a lot of positive things to say from a thinking viewpoint about the same car. It had a great repair record, was very reliable. It just didn't feel like me. And think about those kinds of things. Think about making a decision based on either thinking about something and processing information, or just going by your feelings without other information. And that can oftentimes get you in trouble. Now, the rational functions, as I said, are opposed by the irrational functions. So let's look at those. Now, irrational we typically think of as a negative thing. All Jung is saying by irrational is that they're not rational. They're based on concrete information and responding to stimuli, not necessarily reason or evaluation. It has to do with rather using information. Easier explained by talking about the two irrational functions. So we have sensing. Now, sensing has to do with using your senses to figure out the environment, how you perceive things. So, individuals scoring high on sensing will look at their sense organs and the kind of information that it gives you. It yields concrete facts. How does it feel? How does it smell? How does it taste? What does it look like? If it's something with auditory, what does it sound like? So you can look at all of the five senses and try to make sense of the world in terms of using your senses. This is a very concrete kind of thing. I can talk about, well, this thing is twice as big as this. Get back to my car example, I can talk about the senses and how the controls are laid out, how it feel. Well, I shouldn't use feeling because that was the other one. But how the controls are laid out. Can I sense where they are? Can I perceive how to do the things I need to do to drive this car efficiently? What does it weigh? What are the colors? How is everything put together? Now, the final function is intuition. Individuals scoring high on intuition, again, this is kind of an internal thing. They go beyond sensation and look into their inner unconscious and subliminal processes. So you go beyond the facts. Sometimes it's having to do with having a hunch for something. So it's going on the mere sensation, beyond the mere sensations. Now, my Jungian type is, first one is introversion, the second one is intuition. And I oftentimes try to go beyond the information I have to look for almost a Socratic essence for something. And I've done that even though I'm supposed to be a hardcore empirical researcher and just look at the numbers and the facts and all that kind of stuff. A lot of times I'll look at a project and I'll explore the data and I'll say, there's something here I'm not finding. And I have to muck around in the data to see if I can find it and pull it out. Let me tell you a story about my own intuition where it was right about something. Many, 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 many years ago, we were going to hire in the department a new school psychologist. School psychologists are really hard to hire. There aren't that many at the doctoral level. Competition for them is strong. And we've gone through many searches for school psychs. So this one guy comes along. And I was still a junior faculty member at the time. And I just felt like there's something fishy about this guy. Something's not genuine. Everybody else loved the guy to death. He sucked up to every other constituency in the department. Sucked up as the cool young guy to the young faculty members. Sucked up to the maternal side of one of the more senior women faculty members. And guy just didn't seem genuine. Everybody else was running around talking about how wonderful this guy would be, and we should get him on the faculty. Well, I had learned when I was on a postdoc at the University of Illinois how the old quant professors used to harass newly minted PhDs on the job market with arcane statistical questions that would kind of freak them out. And it was a game they played. While I was a postdoc, I went to several job talks, and they would ask a newly minted PhD, well, if you read my article in Psychometrica in 1962, published in 1962, you would have analyzed your data this way. And since the guy was typically in his late 20s, early 30s, I didn't get to see any women candidates interviewed. They hadn't read any Psychometrica articles from 1962. And they would go, and get all freaked out. So I thought, I'm going to do this to this guy. I'm pretty savvy quantitatively. Can't have him working on our faculty. So job talk comes along. And it's not my style to want to do that to a person. But I just had this really bad feeling. So he starts doing a talk, and he's actually doing a talk on the personality traits of school psychologists. So I go, okay, I can get him spinning around fairly easily. He finishes his talk, question and answer time comes. One of my colleagues asked a really simplistic question on the reliability of the data he presented. Anything a Fresno State student could possibly answer with the things they've learned in our methods and stats class. This guy dissolved into mush with a reliability question. He could not answer it. He kind of spun off. There were a couple of other questions, and it turns out that he showed his true colors. Later we found out those weren't even his data. He had borrowed data because he hadn't collected data in a while for the job talk. And fortunately for the department, and especially for me, we didn't hire him. And he didn't get a chance to get in and fractionalize the department, which is what I'm sure he would have done. So that was one of the times my intuition really struck true. Sometimes it hasn't worked that great, but I would have to say most of the time my intuition is pretty true. Here are the 16 Jungian types. I am the INTJ. I have to look up my screen. Hang on a second. Where's INTJs? INTJs. We are the masterminds. Now, one of the things about the profiles that you get and the interpretive things that I will send you to for our paper project is you'll get by an analysis by Jungian scholars of famous individuals that have your personality type. And they list nonfiction people, presidents, and they also have some non-fictional people. And I have a pretty good crew of INTJ famous folks. Tennis players, believe it or not, the late great Arthur Ashe and Martina Navratilova. Presidents, I get Thomas Jefferson and John Kennedy. Also, Chester Arthur. Do you know who that is? The president you've ever studied? It's kind of fallen by the wayside. Interestingly enough, in fiction characters, Hannibal Lecter and Clarice Starling from Silence of the Lambs supposedly both have the same personality type. And that's kind of a fun thing you can do. And these are more Barnum statements than anything else, like your astrology column in the newspaper. I wouldn't take them too super seriously. But there's nothing wrong with having fun with something once in a while. I have one last quote on Jungian types for you. And it's Jung talking about the functions. And he goes, but as we following consideration will show, these four together produce a kind of totality. And those four, the characteristics are the totality of your personality. Sensation established what is actually present. Thinking enables us to recognize meaning. Feeling tells us its value, and intuition points to the possibilities as to whence it came and whither it is going in a given situation. So we can orientate ourselves to the immediate world, just as we can locate cities in terms of latitude and longitude. Interesting idea. So I find Carl Jung fascinating. I think his work really has had a major effect on society. It's not negative like Freud. It's not hard science, although Jung did more research than Freud. He developed some tests, for example, for word association. And I think that it's the grist for developing many testable theories. And it's fun to look at. It's a good contrast to Freud, rather than spending 5 or 10 minutes each on a whole bunch of neo-analytical types. So, that's it for Jung and me on Jung. See you next time on Personality Psychology. This has been a We Have Couches video production. Copyright 2020, Professor Michael Botwin. All rights reserved.